There is an event that began as something purely athletic, but over time, it transcended the game. And today, it stops the entire world. The Super Bowl was born as a final, as a game, as a fight for a trophy. And for years, that was enough. Until the event developed a second center of attention. There is a moment when the game stops. The players leave the field. The clock no longer matters. And millions of people, fans, casual viewers, even those who don't follow football, all look at the exact same place. It's not a play. It's not a touchdown. It's the halftime show. The only moment where three worlds converge: the sport, the audience, and something bigger. Because during those minutes, the Super Bowl stops being just a championship game and becomes a global icon. Welcome to Super Bowl, the battle that isn't played on the field. To understand why the halftime show became the center of attention, we first need to understand why the Super Bowl was created at all. The Super Bowl wasn't born as a spectacle. It was born as a question. Which football league was truly the best? During the 1960s, the United States was divided. On one side stood the NFL, the established league, tradition, power. On the other side was the AFL, younger, bolder, willing to challenge the rules. Both leagues had teams. Both had talent. In the NFL, players like Bart Starr represented order, discipline, and the Green Bay dynasty. In the AFL, stars like Joe Namath emerged, charismatic, defiant, convinced the future didn't belong to the past. For years, the debate never stopped. The experience of the NFL or the audacity of the AFL? Tradition or innovation? There was no definitive answer until someone proposed a solution. One game, one matchup. Champion versus champion. The idea was pushed forward by Pete Rozelle, then commissioner of the NFL, as a way to end the debate and unite a sport that was deeply divided. And so, in 1967, the first Super Bowl was born. Not as a ritual, not as a global event, but as a football solution to a real rivalry. In those early years, the focus was clear: the game. Halftime existed, but it didn't matter. College marching bands, simple performances, a functional break, nothing more. No one waited for it. No one remembered it. But while football was settling its debate on the field, something else was beginning to grow around it. The Super Bowl stopped being just an answer to a league rivalry and started becoming a national gathering point, a shared ritual. And at the center of that ritual, there was still a pause. Halftime. Still secondary, still quiet, but about to change everything. For many years, halftime was exactly that, a pause, a space between two halves of the game. It wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't a central moment. It was a tradition inherited from college football. For decades, halftime belonged to marching bands, live music, simple choreography. While the players rested, the bands played. It was a moment designed for the stadium, not for television. No one talked about audiences. No one talked about impact. Halftime existed because it always had. But the context changed. When the Super Bowl stopped being just a game and became a nationally televised event, something was exposed. Halftime became a weak point. While the game stopped, part of the audience got up from their seats, went for food, changed the channel, stopped watching. Not because they didn't love the sport, but because there was nothing holding them there. The pause was still the same, but attention? Now it mattered. For the NFL, attention was not a minor detail. For years, a large part of its revenue already depended on television, on contracts signed with a clear promise, millions of people watching the event from start to finish. And when the numbers showed that ratings dropped during halftime, The problem became clear. This wasn't about selling more. It was about not losing the audience, about protecting the value of the event, about making sure that the most watched moment of the year didn't have a gap at its center. The first response wasn't commercial, it was practical, making the break work for those watching from home. Little by little, halftime began to change. Not all at once, not as a massive spectacle, as an experiment. Slightly more elaborate performances, more recognizable artists. One simple idea: keep people from leaving. And while the NFL watched the numbers, someone else began to watch closely. Companies. Not all of them understood it. For many, halftime was still a risk, an uncertain space, a moment that didn't fully belong to the game. But others began to sense something, that if the break could hold the audience, that instant could become just as powerful as any play on the field. Halftime was not history yet. It wasn't a global spectacle, but it had stopped being just a pause. And that was about to change everything. That was about to change, but not in the way most people imagine. The NFL didn't announce a revolution. It didn't open a sales process. It didn't go looking for sponsors. First, it observed. It watched the numbers. It studied audience behavior. And it made a quiet decision to intervene in halftime, not to sell it, to protect it. Halftime began to change, not as a business, but as content. Slightly more ambitious performances, more recognizable artists, better planned productions, with no clear model, with no owner, with no price. Some companies watched from a distance, others asked questions and walked away. For many, that space still made no sense. It wasn't the game. It wasn't traditional advertising. It was uncomfortable. But while some hesitated, the NFL kept experimenting. And then, in 1993, something changed everything. When Michael Jackson stepped onto the Super Bowl stage, he didn't appear as a compliment to the game. He became the center of the entire event. Silence. Stillness. A few eternal seconds before the show began. For the first time in history, ratings didn't drop during halftime. They rose. People didn't get up. They didn't change the channel. They didn't leave. Halftime had achieved something unprecedented, holding everyone's attention at the same time. That show had no sponsor. It had no commercial name. The NFL covered the production, and the impact was cultural. From that moment on, halftime stopped being a technical solution and became history. In the years that followed, the stage continued to grow without belonging to anyone. The NFL controlled it. The public expected it, but no one had claimed it. Until one company understood something before the rest. That a moment with that level of attention couldn't remain neutral forever. Not because it needed to be exploited, but because someone eventually would. For a long time, several companies observed the phenomenon and chose not to enter. Some didn't understand it. Others didn't want to take the risk. Halftime remained an unusual territory. But in 2012, one company decided to step in. Pepsi. It didn't arrive to create the show. It arrived once the show was already inevitable. The agreement marked a turning point. Pepsi began paying around $10 million per year for the rights to the halftime show. A price that didn't buy commercials. It bought association. It bought presence in the most watched moment of the night. By then, the show already cost more than $10 million to produce. Adjusted for today's reach and impact, that same agreement would now be valued at an estimated $25 to $35 million annually. Not because of inflation, because of attention. Because halftime no longer lives only in the stadium or on television. It lives in culture. With Pepsi's arrival, halftime stopped being just history. For the first time, it became an officially contested territory. The sport had created the stage. Culture had consecrated it. And now, economic power had decided to stay. For a decade, the halftime show had a name: Pepsi. It brought stability. It turned the spectacle into a fixed part of the Super Bowl. But no territory of power remains untouched forever. Over time, the world around the show changed. The audience no longer just watched the Super Bowl. They talked about it. They shared it. They replayed it in clips, on platforms, on screens that didn't exist when Pepsi first arrived. Halftime was still the center, but the stage no longer ended when the show was over. That change altered everything. As Pepsi's agreement approached its end, the NFL faced a different question than it had in 2012. It wasn't just who could pay. It was who truly understood what the moment had become. Pepsi tried to stay. It defended its position. It had built a long, solid, recognizable relationship. But this time, it wasn't alone. Other names began to circulate around the stage. Platforms that understood that the real value of halftime wasn't only in the live broadcast, but in what happened after. There was talk of YouTube, of Netflix, of Amazon, not as a public auction, not as a declared war, but as conversations, interest, and exploration of a territory that no longer belonged only to television. In that context, a number began to circulate. The exact figure was never made public, but industry estimates place the value of the deal between $30 and $50 million per year. Not for the show itself, but for what happened after the show. The stage had changed its nature. It was no longer just a spectacle. It was a global cultural platform. And in that new context, the NFL made a decision. In 2023, the halftime show changed hands. Apple Music became the new partner of the most-watched stage on the planet. Not because it wanted to advertise, but because it understood how culture moves when the show ends. Apple didn't arrive to replace what halftime was. It arrived to amplify what it had already become. The change wasn't aesthetic, it was conceptual. The stage was still the same, but the world watching it was not. When people talk about the Super Bowl as a cultural event, they usually think about the game or the halftime show. But there is another stage just as fiercely contested: advertising time. A 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl can now cost more than $7 million. And here's something most people don't know. If a brand wants 15 seconds, it doesn't pay half. It pays almost the same. Because the value isn't in the duration, it's in the moment, in being there. That price reveals something deeper. During the Super Bowl, people don't escape advertising. They wait for it. They talk about it. They judge it as if it were part of the game. That's why many brands don't adapt existing campaigns. They create commercials only for that night. Pieces that air once, that aren't recycled, that aren't repeated. In some cases, producing the commercial costs more than buying the airtime. In 2022, one brand pushed this logic to the extreme. Amazon produced a commercial starring Scarlett Johansson and Colin Jost. The total cost, production plus airtime, exceeded $30 million for a single spot that aired only once. This wasn't an exception. Over the years, the Super Bowl has brought together figures who usually belong to film, music, and pop culture. Eminem starring in a Chrysler commercial filmed like a movie. Britney Spears in Pepsi campaigns that defined an era. Actors, musicians, and celebrities not appearing to sell a product, but to become part of the event. Because the Super Bowl is the only place where advertising doesn't interrupt the spectacle. It is the spectacle. There are viewers who don't remember the final score, but they remember a commercial. They talk about it the next day. They search for it. They compare it. That behavior is what turns the Super Bowl into a unique advertising machine. Not because of the number of ads, but because it achieved something no other event can, making millions of people watch advertising with the same attention they give to the game. On the field, a championship is played. Off the field for a few hours, the entire world watches the same thing, at the same time. Now you know the Super Bowl didn't become what it is by accident. You know why it was created, why it went beyond the game, how a simple break between halves turned into the most watched stage on the planet. You know that the halftime show wasn't born from marketing, but from attention. That it became culture before it became business. And that today, behind those 15 minutes, there are decisions, numbers, and battles that never happen on the field. But sports aren't built only on massive stages like this. Some of the most important stories are shaped far away from spectacle, by athletes who were never supposed to fit, not because of a lack of talent, but because of a physical limit others couldn't see past. One arm, one path, and the choice to keep going anyway. Jim Abbott didn't become a symbol because the system made room for him. He became one because he stayed when the system stayed silent. Because sometimes understanding sports isn't about knowing how the spectacle works, but about remembering why people keep playing even when the rules were never written for them.